The 5200 was a tragedy. The 5200 was a good idea gone horribly wrong.
The big problem that we had at Atari, the thing that killed the industry more than any other one thing, even more possibly than the E.T. video game, is that it was the first product life cycle. No one had ever been through a major success video game console life cycle. So where does it end? Nowadays, when somebody comes out with a new system, they already are designing the next system because they know the life of a system. They know a console is good for a certain number of years, and then it's going to die, it's going to fall off, and that's when we need to be ready and prepared to come in with the new system. Holy crap, you know, our first machine is finally falling off the cliff. We need something. We have something. We can take the 800, 400, 800 computer, repackages the 5200, spit it out, and we can do it.
So the 5200 was basically what the 400, 800 was going to be 3 years before. It's a tough business. Business is cruel. And you know, like I say, I'll say it again, it was the first time anything was being done. No one knew.
And what happened was the Atari 5200, it grew very large because
it was pretty large.
Perceived value, so bigger was better in some respects. And then marketing got really focused on the Intellivision, and Intellivisions had a bunch of buttons. They had a keypad, and they had this disc with 12 distinct regions. And so, hey, if we put an analog stick here, and one that doesn't self-center was the great idea, this will be a better marketing message than the Intellivision controller. And of course, it was a horrible experience. The company lost focus on what was important, and it was gameplay's important. You know, good games sell, bad games don't. If you've got a bad control mechanism, doesn't matter how good the graphics are. It's not going to be fun to play.
Now what do you do? So, and that was the thing. Engineering we really wanted to do something cool, right? We wanted to do like a real next generation because the 400, 800 was already last generation.
The engineering team and the creative team, the game designers, we were so upset, and we all felt that we were making a wrong decision with this controller.
It was a pretty rough controller.
We put together a petition to upper management, and we just explained that, you know, this is a great product, the control is lacking, we've got some other alternatives we want you to see, and my name's number 3 on the list of the petitioners.
See, I wasn't someone who signed petitions so much as talked to people behind the scenes, because I always felt that was more like the way you operate in a corporation. And but I definitely put the word out whenever I could that, like, you know, this is something we either should have done a few years ago or, you know, can't really do now.
We told marketing, hey, we could make this 2600 compatible. They didn't want anything to do with that. They said they must be very separate and distinct. We can't have backwards compatibility, which at the time we thought might be a great feature. It's a good way to get people that have these Atari games already and keep them on the Atari platform instead of giving them an opportunity to jump.
That would have been awesome.
Platform. And so we designed the product specifically so that you could never have 2600 compatibility. About 2 months before launch, they demanded 2600 compatibility. And at that time, we had to build an adapter. And then we actually had to modify consoles that were already made, the first ones, to work with this adapter. And we called this thing the piggyback parasite. We were just horribly embarrassed by that situation. That never should have happened.
There was some big time denial, you know, around Atari, because nobody wants their parade rained on. And when it's the best parade you've ever imagined in your life, nobody wants to see a cloud. You just don't want to see it. So we didn't.
That my 5200 I sold didn't have that piece. Look at these controllers though. It was huge. And there's the comic, eh? Squadron. Oh, look at these graphics. Ah! Oh, I finally got a point. And smoked. That was an ace. Tag the net there. Ah. That was just like real tennis, man.
When you have a tragedy, and I do believe that the fall of the video game industry in the early 80s was a tragedy. It was a tragedy to many, many people. It changed a lot of lives.
I think it's pretty obvious when it comes to the video game crash that Atari didn't have control over the quality.
I mean, it needed some sort of way to keep just anybody from writing cartridges for it.
And so many people saw this video game gold rush, and they just started dumping crap. I remember going into KB toy stores and just seeing really bad box art and just really just terrible looking games. And that's when I started losing interest, and the market became flooded just with garbage. And it ultimately led to, of course, things like ET being, actually buried in the desert like garbage.
And what happened was that ET became the face of the crash of the video game industry, and I, of course, was the butt behind the face. That's kind of the way it went.
Greed and hubris, that's what undid Atari. If they just had worked more from a place of like focusing on making great games and delivering great games to the customer instead of like, how can we maximize revenue, I feel like they'd still be a huge powerhouse today.
Frankly, Warner did not understand technology. He didn't understand the consumer marketplace, the video game, and Ray Kassar, I think was afraid of releasing new product because it might not be as successful as VCS. So that's a sure way to fail.
I regret that we didn't have a new console by '84 that would have made it so that Atari continued to be a really viable business.
We never, ever got down to ever having any process by which we could come up with a better system.
Even to this day, I think people do believe that, like, if they had just released like the 5200 earlier, or if they released the 7800, or they had done different things, they would could never have they would have survived the crash a lot better, and they would be like a powerhouse today. Like as a kid, I didn't know much about business, but I just felt like something was wrong.
No one knew anything. Certainly, no one knew how to replace an existing console with a new one.
The real one-liner about why the game industry crashed and went away is that it was a first product life cycle and nobody knew what to do.
Where am I supposed to go? I remember some old magazines that advertised this game. It looked so good on the advertisements. That was the game. It just looked good. It looked good in the magazines. Take your own left-handed joystick. Oh, I thought you meant in this. Nobody. That one had. That was the worst viewed video or video game I had in 6 months. I had to change it up. I remember the 5200 being one of the closer ones to the actual arcades. Although that game honestly isn't better than this game. Like, this game has like 50 different games in it. And many of them are huge classics. They're just different than each other, different style, but this one's like almost like exploring history, you know? Crystal castles. Bounty Bob. 7800. That's the one that had the good ones, I think. I remember my friend's uncle had one of those. Controller looks way better too, eh? See what 7800's asteroids look like. A little different. Oh. Way more faithful to the arcade anyway than the other one was. Although way harder. $2,600 Junior. It was only $50 at the time. That's pretty cool. That's like those little Nintendo Wii's. Boxing.
There's this funny time period in the history of, if I wrote a book on the history of the video game industry, there's this funny time period where we had left Activision and we went from this fabulous AAA office complex, beautiful. We had more space than we needed by a factor of 5, and we went to the most horrible office in Midland Park, New Jersey, in the basement of an optician's office. Game industry, this was after the crash. Game industry was a disaster. And it was just, oh man, what an office. It was horrible. But we survived in it. I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do. So anyway, we're in this horrible office and we're doing C64 stuff at that point.
C64 was awesome.
I get a call from a buddy of mine. Actually, he was our part-time sales guy. And he always visited Toys R Us, and he knew them really well. He called me and said, you know, you're going to laugh, but they want to know if anybody's doing 2600 games. Because at that point, there were none. Nobody was doing them.
But there were 26 million consoles in homes.
And people were going in Toys R Us saying, why don't you sell games for my Atari anymore? So I said, wow, that's interesting. How many would he buy if he had a 2600 game? I said, oh, you know, 20, 30,000 pieces probably. And I said, all right, I'll get back to you. So we did Title Match Wrestling and Super Skateboarding, first 2 titles. I mean, regular skateboarding, first 2 titles. And he loved them and they sold like crazy. And at that point in time, we were the only people in the world making games on the Atari 2600. My phone rings and it's the Tramiels. So he did some 2600 games. You know, do a couple for us, because word got around. There's actually a need. And then Activision calls and says, do some 2600 games for us? And I said, well, why don't you guys just do them? He goes, well, you know, if I could be completely honest with you, we don't have anything. We don't have the specs. We don't have manuals. We don't have the equipment. He said, we couldn't make a 2600 game if we wanted to. So could you make something for us? I tell people that, they're like, who the hell wanted 2600 games? You know what? No one told consumers that there had been a crash. No one went to their house and said, you don't like video games anymore. Because that's what Toys R Us and Walmart said. People don't like video games anymore. But the people at home were sitting going, God damn, I'm tired of combat. Isn't there something else I can play on this machine? So it was good. We had a great run there. We had a lot of money off those games.
Old school skateboarding game, eh? Starting in the 1970s, the personal computer began to carve out its own place in the family home. $500 and $1,000. Look at that computer, eh?
How's business?
Fine.
Terrific. How do you keep track of your customers?
My Atari 400 home computer. Excuse
Excuse me, Dad.
Why Atari?
Shopped around. It's a lot of computing capability for such a low price.
Use it a lot?
Sheriff, life's not all fun and games. There's homework I even program. Atari has lots of software, not all the others do. And of course, only Atari has games like Centipede. Well, we executives have to unwind.
Atari home computers. Only Atari puts so much in.
Man, commercials were so cool back then. I never saw that commercial before. I was pretty young, I think, when those things were playing. The 800 must be the sequel.
Bought a home computer, huh?
An Atari 800 home computer. Nothing but the best for my son.
Why Atari?
Atari makes computers that, seem friendly, part of the family.
Want to show off?
Sure, they're real easy. Terrific software, huh?
Nice graphics.
And how do you like this for sound capability?
Impressive.
It sure is.
So what's his first project?
Soon, the alphabet. A is for airplane.
Atari home computers. Only Atari.
I don't think he really bought that computer for that kid.
I think the Atari 400, 800 were really the first home computers that I felt like were designed to be in somebody's home and for an average person to utilize.
Atari, made some interesting decisions over the years. I mean, they were #1 in the world in making video games, but they saw home computers were coming. And Apple II was out, and they said, we got to compete with Apple.
Apple II, that was a legendary computer, actually.
It came down
I never had one, but
that we were going to make a computer like
I think they were in schools or something.
But the engineering department said,
Oregon Trail.
We're video game people. Why are we doing this? But they were told, you will do this.
My friend had a Commodore Amiga, I remember.
Made the Atari 800 into the next best video game player.
You're back. Welcome back.
All the sprite capability. It had coprocessors in there. The first GPU in a computer was probably in the Atari 800. All of this stuff was going on in the engineering department, and yet the management thought we were making a computer. We were really just making a video game that we could make cool games on.
My participation was mainly on the prototype pre-production side. We had this very sophisticated, allegedly sophisticated, internal interactive test.
Did you see any meters?
That we couldn't get a single unit to pass. Labor Day 1979. Can you guys work overtime over the weekend? We need to hand build some production units because we need to put them complete through the entire process. They need to be completely finished, consumer product in the box. We need these for JCPenney's so that they can make the holiday catalog. So we worked, I actually didn't leave Atari for about 3 days, hand building these units. And it was like 4 400s and 4 800s to ship on Monday to JCPenney's. They received them at their warehouse. They took pictures of them for the catalog, and then they immediately shipped them back to us. That was it. That's what we needed to do to get this product out.
My main contribution to the Atari 800 operating system, I created a language similar to PostScript that could draw lines and squares and circles and vector graphics drawn into the bitmap of the Atari 800 and put them into the operating system so that I didn't have to put it in any of my games. So I could borrow from the operating system stuff that I'd put in there and use it when making games. So yes, we were tasked with working on the operating system, but we did it our way. We did it in the video game method.
The idea came up that maybe I could get one of these machines for Christmas, and I thought I was going to get an Apple II because that was what I had at school and what I thought was cool. But I got an Atari, and it was an Atari 800 with a tape cassette drive.
Tape cassette drive, eh?
At first I was like, oh, it's not an Apple, but it's my own computer. It's super exciting. And then the more I got into it, you know, the more I realized it was so much better than the Apple. Probably piss off some Apple people, but it, you know, it was really an amazing machine. I mean, the graphics and sound on it were incredible, and it was a super fun machine to program. And so that was really what got me started.
And you know what's gonna happen, Stephanie, with those pictures? In a couple of years, you'll be like, why did I take a picture of the sky?
We had access to the 800, 400, you know, pre-production models for probably a good year before they ever hit the marketplace. And I would literally every weekend check out an Atari 800 and prototype Star Raiders and spend the entire weekend.
And then you'll wonder in 2 years why you got a picture of the sky.
Phenomenal. I couldn't get enough of it.
One of my favorite games in the 800. I really liked Star Raiders. I still play that today. I still bring up my Atari 800 and play that occasionally.
Star Raiders was the killer app. Star Raiders was to the 800 what Halo was to the Xbox. You know, it was the game. You really, pretty much everyone bought it with the system. It was the system seller.
It was very well done. It had a lot of depth. It was easy. It had easy modes where people could get through it, and you could work up to the harder modes. And the harder modes just made things a little more difficult. They didn't penalize you for getting good at the game. So,
what did I do with my 800? And I actually did buy an Atari 800 in the company store, and I paid full price for it, full employee price. And I played Star Raiders because that's what you did on the Atari 800. You know, there was a lot of great stuff about, you know, storing recipes and doing this and learning things, and I did go through